All right, so what are we doing in this video? We're going through FreeCodeCamp's courses, and we're just trying to get this responsive web development certificate that they are offering. And we're just going through the whole process. So if you're watching this video, hopefully you're interested in going through that process, or even looking at the problem that we're going to be trying to go through with all these steps that they have us do. And this one is set up for 45 different steps. We're going to be building the Rothko painting utilizing the CSS Box Model. I don't know what Rothko painting we're talking about, but we're going to take a look at it. And these are the steps that it says that we're going to be doing here. So you can see that we have 45 of these things, and we've already have videos going over the rest of them as well. So if you are on this journey, keep on watching, keep on going through these videos. I believe we'll break this one up and maybe into 2 different videos. We'll go halfway and then finish the other half in a different video just to break things up a little. But if you're new to the channel, what are we doing? My name's Rob. I'm with PreCodeCamp. I'm a coding instructor, and I'm going through this course through freeCodeCamp just to explain things as we're going through it. Some information out there is for free. Might as well utilize it, and I'm going to share my knowledge by going through it with you as well. So anyways, if that sounds like you, keep on watching this video because we're going to go step by step and build this out. And if you run into errors, I will definitely have this video all chaptered out step by step, so you can just go to the step that you care about. All right. But if you want to learn something, then watch the video in its entirety. All right, let's get started. All right, we just started step 1, and it gives us a little preview of what we're going to be doing. This is the Rothko painting utilizing the CSS model here with FreeCodeCamp. And again, I'm not an artist by any means, but I guess it is what it is. We'll see what we're going to be doing. Okay. At the very beginning, step number 1, it tells us that we need to go ahead and do our doc type and declare it to be HTML. And then we are wanting to make sure that we set the HTML block to English and then have a head and a body. So this is all nothing that we haven't done before. If you're following along in the other videos, we're just going to do the exclamation doc type. And then we want to set that to HTML. And then we're going to come down here. We're going to do the HTML, set the language, and we're going to set that to ENG. And then we're going to close that off. And I'm going to put a closing tag in here as well. So I always tell this with all the students and stuff is whenever we're creating tags, let's just go ahead and make a closing tag before we're moving on to the next tag. I know it might be a little bit tedious, but the way that FreeCodeCamp has you working in this, it doesn't behave like your normal code editor, like Visual Studio Code would automatically apply these tags here for you. Next is the head. So we want the head in here. And again, I'm putting the closing tags on here. And then it says that we want the body. Bodies and the head section, they both get opening and closing tags. Okay. All right. So I believe this should work. The only one that did not need one is the doc type at the very beginning. Okay. So let's go ahead and check our code here. It looks like our language needs to be EN. I added an extra G on here, and let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. All right, moving on to the next step here. So one of the things that I always take for granted, or you always take for granted anyway, is some of the things that really help you when you're utilizing a Visual Studio Code editor is that all these things that we're doing right now, it all comes natural with a simple 1 keystroke, and all the stuff is there for you, ready for you to get to go to work in the body. It puts everything that you need there in the head and everything. Again, some of these things might be a little bit tedious, and I would have to agree with you on that. But for step number 2 in the FreeCodeCamp adventure here with the Rothko painting, we want to go ahead and in the head add a meta tag, and we want to have the character set be to UTF, and that will encode our website properly. And then we want to have the title here, and the title does get opening and closing tags. And notice that I'm not typing the title out quite yet because I want to make sure that I put those closing tags on there. And the title, they want it to be Rothko painting. Okay. And then it says within the body, we want to go ahead and do an image tag. And we're going to go ahead and do an image tag. And the image is one of those void elements that does not need a closing tag. And we want the source, the src, we want to set that to, and I'm not going to type this out. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and put it in there. And this is the first part that we should actually see something appear on our screen. And so this is the common CSS box model that we're going to be working with. Sweet. Let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. We're moving on to the next. All right, step number 3 here. It says this is the CSS box model, and every HTML element is treated as if it's a box where it has 4 sides, right? And it says, imagine you're receiving a box from your favorite online retailer like Amazon. And the content is the item itself that is in the box. In our case, it's any kind of element, whether that be a header, a paragraph, or an image element. And so this image that you see over here, it may look very familiar to you if you played around with anything with the development tools. And if you haven't, no worries, you don't have to. But later on in your learning career, you probably will. And I'm going to bring them up right now. I'm in Chrome. I'm going to hit the F12 button. And if you see over here in the elements, and we're under computed, we have this nice little box model. And you can see that the blue area is the content or the item itself. And then the green is the padding. So we've seen some of these keywords before when we're talking about CSS. And then the yellow here is any kind of border or border radius that you'd like to apply. And then you have the margins, and the margins obviously go on the outsides. Margins on outside, paddings on inside, and then the border also takes up some real estate as well. And I'm sure we're going to go through that in our model here. But in order to move this along a little bit, it says in order to pass this part of the challenge, go ahead and change the source and update it to the following image. So we're just going to update it with this one right here. I guess it's just changing a number 2 here. So instead of highlighting everything and copying it, it showed that same slide that I was trying to show you in the browser. Awesome. And it just didn't include the margin, which is on the exterior here. Okay, so let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next one. Okay, so step number 4, I feel like we're going through a little bit of a PowerPoint show to explain a little bit about each one of these elements here, or the attributes that we've been using the whole time, and showing it to you in a graphical way. What it's talking about here, it says the content is surrounded by space called padding. And think of that like bubble wrap. And that's true. Like if you are taking any kind of element and you are trying to put some padding, you're squeezing it in together when it comes to padding. And then the border, think of it like the container. It just goes around something, right? It doesn't really push or spread anything out per se from the inside, but it's just something that goes around the outside of your element. So let's go ahead and change this to number 3 and see what we get for our next slideshow. There we go. Now we have 2 different images, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about that in the next step here. So let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. Moving on to the next. All right, so on step number 5 here, it tells us that the margin is the outside area around the box used to control the space between the other elements. And here the bottom element has a larger top margin, pushing it further down the page. And it says, now that you understand the CSS box model, let's go ahead and get started with the Rothko painting. The things that I do want to make sure that we understand here is that each element can have its own margin, it can have its own padding, it can have its own border. And so every single thing, every single element that's on the page has all these rules applied to it. And some of them have default values that are applied. And then we also have block elements. We have inline block, and then we have inline elements. And there's lots of differences when it comes to the CSS box model that applies to any of those. And one of the things that I did want to maybe demonstrate to you here with margin just a little bit is this website here. I got my dev tools pulled up, and I'm clicking on this arrow, and I can select certain elements, and I can take a look at the box model here, and I can adjust things and try things out. And if I wanted to push some of the text that is below this handcrafted wood art, if I wanted to push the next element further down, all I'd have to do is increase this number, this margin here, to 50, okay? And you can see that it put a larger gap. Now, something that I wanted to bring up in this as well is that if I select this one right here, this element, okay, and I go ahead and say, hey, you know what? I want to apply a top margin here and of 50. I just want to show you that it's not like magnets where its 50 margin is going against the bottom's 50 margin, and they're repelling each other even further. And so you're going to notice that there's overlap when it comes to it. And it's almost as if it is trying to do like the greater of the two when it comes to who controls what. So anyways, I just wanted to bring that to your attention when it comes to things like the margin. But I'm sure we'll see if the box model kind of walks us through that. But as far as getting done with step number 5, what we're looking at here is I'm going to go ahead and delete this. It says go ahead and remove that image element and go ahead and check your code. So there we go. We're moving on to the next. All right, step number 6 with FreeCodeCamps, building a Rothko painting utilizing the CSS Box Model. It says just add a div and then a class with canvas. Now, like I said, typing this out longhand can be annoying, but it is what it is, because in Visual Studio Code, this would have been so simple. So canvas, and we want to go ahead and close off that. And that's all it's wanting. Let's go and check it. There we go. Moving on to the next. All right, step number 7 says that we need to link our styling page that we're going to be getting here shortly. So that's going to be a link. We want the relationship here to be a style sheet, and then we want the to equate to the styles.css. And I believe that is all that it's wanting. There we go. Moving on to the next. So this is going to be step number 8, time for some CSS. It says even though our div has no text in it, it's still treated like a box with content, but it doesn't have any content in it, which is why we're not seeing anything there. So it says write a CSS rule targeting the canvas class that we just got done doing. And let's go ahead and set a width to 300 pixels. So we can come over here and we can go ahead and do the dot, and then we're going to do canvas. And then we're going to set that equal to a width of 300 pixels. Now, we're not going to see anything visually, and sometimes as I'm going through the class and stuff, we may want to maybe visualize things, and this is where I would say, hey, let's go ahead and do an outline here to just see it. And I'm sure we're probably going to be adding some colors in here in the background, but we can just do a real quick 2 pixels, black, solid, and you can see that we do have something that is 300 pixels long. And later on, I'm sure we're going to do a height, right, of 300 pixels. And now we get a box. Again, we're slowly building this box out. I'm going to go ahead and delete the stuff we don't need. But in class, we'd kind of be going over something like that. So let's go ahead and check our code. And, oh, it says 500 pixels, doesn't it? So let's go ahead and change that to 500 and check our code. All right, cool. Yeah, I went for the shiny object here of 300 pixels. That's wrong of me. Let's move on to the next step. All right, step number 9 says, let's go ahead and add a height. Let's go ahead and do that. I don't know why we can't combine some of these steps here with the width and the height and everything, but let's go ahead and check our code. We're moving on to the next step here. So step number 10, this is where we're actually going to see something. We're going to be applying a background color. So it's just going to be background-color. And this is just another CSS property. And I'm going to go ahead and copy the hashtag here so I don't make a mistake. And there we go. Now we visually see something on our page. Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. Moving on to the next. All right, so we're on step number 11 here. It says every painting needs a frame. Let's go ahead and wrap the canvas in another element with a div with the class of frame. So that one seems pretty easy to do. So we're just going to wrap this class here. We're going to do a class. We're going to set that equal to frame. And then we are going to put our closing div down here. So this is what it means by wrapping the element. And obviously we're not going to see anything quite yet until we apply something to the frame class. And we'll have to move on to the next step to see what it's going to do. So let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. We're moving on to the next one. Okay, so we're on step number 12 here. It tells us that let's go ahead and use that frame selector class, which remember we put on the outside of that element. And we want to use a border shorthand and give it a solid black and 250 pixels. That's big, but we're going to go ahead and do this here. And so we want to do frame, and this is the class. Remember, I always say the best way to remember is it a hashtag or a period. Classes, we all go to school, right? Classes have periods, IDs, we have numbers, right? It's hashtag number ID. All right, this says use the border, and this is going to be the border shorthand, which is going to be, we want 50 pixels, solid black. And it doesn't matter the order that it goes in. But as you can see, that is now my border here. And so I'm going to go ahead and extend that here some. So as you can see, it's going all the way around the frame as the border, but it's not really snugging the element. And that's because our element on the inside is set to a width of 500 pixels. We're limiting that child element that is inside of our HTML file here. We're saying, hey, Canvas, you can only go so far. We're limiting you to 50 pixels, but the parent, which is the frame, it can go all the way. And so that's what it's referring to here. So anyways, let's go ahead and check our code here. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next. All right, so step number 13 here, it says, man, that frame is way too wide. In the frame selector here, which we are on line 9, but go ahead and set the width to 500 pixels. So we're just going to do width, and we're going to set that to 500 pixels. Okay, and now you can see that it does fit much snugger, even though now I am expanding and contracting this browser window, right? And so that's exactly what I told you before earlier. The parent had free range to go 100% all the way, and the child did not. So now we're limiting both the frame and the canvas. Okay, let's go and check our code. Moving on to the next. Step number 14 here. It says that let's go ahead and use some padding and apply it to the frame. And that way it will give it a little more buffer space. As we're going through this, some of the things that you may want to start doing and thinking about is I'm adding these keys or these properties and applying a value to them. And what is that going to do? What is that going to change? And so if we think about it here, I'm on the frame, I'm going to be adding some padding. Where am I going to be seeing change? And am I going to be seeing white space? What am I going to see? So those are the types of questions that you need to ask yourself as you're going through this. Now, it did say to use the short term or the shorthand version of padding. So instead of you typing in here, padding dash top, padding dash bottom, right? Like we're just saying, hey, padding, and we want 50 pixels all the way around. And typically you would start with the clock, right? Where we start at the top and then we move over to the right-hand side and then we move to the bottom and then to the left. But if they're all the same value, you can get away with just doing 50 pixels, just one, and it's going to apply it all around. That's cool. So yeah, go ahead and expand this out. And we can see that we now have some padding, we have some buffer. And remember, this padding, it's pushing on that border and it's pushing it away. And you can definitely utilize your commenting tool, Control/ on the keyboard or Command/ on the keyboard to take a look at the before and after. So you can see how it is just forcing that parent to be a little more pushed out, and it almost resembles a little bit of like an inner margin when we're wrapping these things here. So anyways, let's go ahead and hit the submit and we're ready for the next one. So step number 15 here, it says use the margins to adjust the outside element. And so, of course, that's the frame. And the vertical, which means the top and bottom, it wants it to be 20 pixels. And then the left and right, it wants it to be auto. So there's a real quick way to do this with just doing the shorthand of margin property, right? So margin, and then the two values that we need here for this, top and bottom. So what would we like to do on the top and bottom? If they're both equal, we can just get away with doing 20 pixels. But we need the second value because right now that's being applied to all of the edges of it. So we want the auto to be done next. And what the auto will do, it puts an auto on the margin left and the margin right, which will center this frame on the page or center it on the parent element, which happens to be the body. So that's how that is working. So we get the 20 pixels up here. And then if we had another element below, it would be 20 pixels also down below. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. Looks good. Moving on. Step number 16 looks like we're painting on the canvas here this time. And it says inside of the canvas, I'll go ahead and create another div and give it a class of 1. And so we're not going to see anything because there's no text or any context in here for it to be shown. So I'm just going to do a div closing tag here. And then let's go ahead and add that class. And it wants us to do 1. All right, check the code. Moving on. Write a new rule that targets our number one class. And we want to set that to 425 pixels. Again, start thinking about what are we going to see? Are we going to see anything? In this case, what I'm thinking is, hey, we're just applying a width. We're not applying any kind of background, right? We're not applying any kind of border. So we should see nothing until we get to the next step here. We're just going to do 1 and set the curly brackets width, and we want to set that to 425 pixels. So there we go. Let's go ahead and check our work. There we go. Moving on to the next. All right, again, step number 18 with this. We're not going to see anything with this until we start applying color. So I'm just going to do the height. I'm going to set that to 150 pixels. All right, let's check the code. All right, moving on to the next. All right, so we are on step number 19. Now we're actually going to see the shape that we just got done creating, which is the square, a 425 pixel wide by 150 pixels. And so let's go ahead and apply this. So it's going to be background color. And we're going to set that to the yellow, it looks like. And let's go ahead and check our code. That looks great. Let's move on to the next. In this one, step number 20 of this process, it says that we want to go ahead and do a margin here. And it's going to be the exact same thing that we saw earlier, which is the 20 pixels are going to be applied to the top and bottom. And then you want the horizontal to be auto. So that's how we're going to do that one. Let's go ahead and check our code. And there we go. Moving on to the next. All right. So step number 21 says, now that the 1 is centered, right, horizontally, the top margin is pushing past the canvas and onto the frame's border and shifting the entire canvas down by 20 pixels. So if we can go ahead and add a padding of 1 pixels, that will give it a little bit of separation here. So let's go ahead and test this out here. We're going to do padding here, and we're going to do 1 pixel. And there we go. That is how we're going to solve this one. And let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. Moving on to the next. All right, so step number 22 says that by adding that 1 pixels to the top, bottom, left, and right, it actually changed our dimensions for the entire space here for the box to be 502 pixels by 602 pixels. And that's not what we want. And so what we would like to do instead is let's go ahead and replace this with overflow hidden. So do overflow and then hidden, and that should help us out. Go ahead and hit the check the code, and there we go. Moving on to the next. Right, step number 23, add another div with a class of 2. So we'll do class div with a class of 2. Love these names that they're coming up with. And then we're going to go ahead and close it off. And let's go ahead and check it out. There we go. Moving on to the next. Step number 24 has us create a new CSS rule called for the to selector. So we got the to selector. And here we're going to do a width of 475 pixels. Let's go ahead and check our code for it. Can't forget the semicolon. That looks good. Moving on to our next step. So step number 25 has us add 200 pixels for the height. So we'll just go ahead and do height, and we'll set that to 200 pixels. Again, not going to see anything quite yet because we haven't applied a background color. Go ahead and check our code. There we go. Moving on to the next. Step number 26 with this freeCodeCamp, building a Rothko painting. So set the background color to the following hex code. So background dash color, and we're going to set that to this right. All right. It's already looking like a piece of artwork here. All right. Check our code. All right. On to the next step. All right. So step number 27 with building a Rothko painting for freeCodeCamp. It tells us that we want to set our margins. We want to set it to auto. And so you can just do margin auto for this, and it will center that for you. All right, I told you I was going to do half. We did a little more than half in this, and we're going to go ahead and continue on with the second video because we're already almost at 25 minutes here, and I got to go get to class because I'm teaching live here in a few minutes. So anyways, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.